Why is it that so many women in this age of so much power and influence still struggle with inflated egos? Why are they constantly seeking validation from others, placing themselves above their true worth and spiritual calling? Tonight we'll uncover the truth behind this desperate need for approval and the deadly impact it has not just on women, but on society as a whole. Stay with me until the end, for we will reveal the powerful way to set women free from these chains of pride. My friends, the rise of the inflated ego is not a new problem. It's been around for centuries. In this modern world, women are being bombarded with messages that tell them they must be everything: beautiful, successful, powerful, and always in control. They are taught to elevate themselves, to seek status, and to chase after the applause of the world. But what does this pursuit really cost? You see, an inflated ego may appear as strength, but it is nothing more than a mask, hiding deep insecurities that women don't always recognize in themselves. And it doesn't stop at mere appearance, it affects relationships. An inflated ego isolates, it creates barriers where there should be bonds of love, kindness, and empathy. Women with this kind of pride begin to believe they are untouchable, that their success is theirs alone, and that they are superior to those around them. But I tell you this, pride comes before the fall. And that fall can be great and devastating. The isolation and pain that follow are not worth the empty praise of an inflated ego. But I ask you, is this just a psychological issue, or is it a spiritual problem at its core? When we let our ego take control, when we believe that we can create our own success, we are turning away from the greater calling God has for us. We are denying the truth of who we are, humble creations meant to reflect His glory, not our own. Here's the good news. There is a way to break free. To destroy the inflated ego, we must confront the lie that we are self-made, self-sufficient, and in control. The path to freedom is found in humility. We must lower ourselves, acknowledge that we are not above others, and embrace the life of servitude that God has called us to. We must recognize that our worth does not come from what the world says about us, but from who we are in Him. True strength, true freedom, comes not in elevating ourselves, but in humbling ourselves. When we destroy the ego, we open ourselves to a life of purpose and peace. Peace that comes not from the praise of others, but from knowing we are walking in alignment with God's will. Tonight, let us make that choice. Let us humble ourselves, destroy the ego that keeps us chained, and walk into a life of true freedom and power. We are not above our Creator. We are His humble servants, and in that servitude, we find the freedom we've been searching for all along. This speech uses engaging storytelling and reflection to draw in the audience while offering both a challenge and a solution that is spiritually uplifting. In today's world, women are constantly being sold an image, a perception of success, beauty, and power that is often far from the truth. This image, however, isn't one of self-realization or true confidence. It is a constructed persona, a mask that many women wear to be accepted, admired, and validated by the world. From a young age, they are taught that their value is linked to how they look, how much they achieve, and how others perceive them. As a result, many women begin to chase after an ideal, an inflated sense of self, believing that by elevating themselves and their worth, they will find fulfillment. But this inflated ego isn't something that brings happiness. It's a reflection of the world's shallow standards, not of real self-worth. The rise of the inflated ego in women is not merely a societal trend. It is a dangerous trap that distorts their understanding of true value. The culture that celebrates celebrity, materialism, and outward beauty has a powerful influence on how women define themselves. They begin to internalize the belief that their worth is tied to external factors, what they own, how they look, and how much attention they receive. Women are constantly told to be more, do more, have more, but the message is never about being enough as they are. This constant pressure creates a sense of inadequacy if they don't live up to these unrealistic expectations, and so they become consumed by the need to project an image of strength, independence, and superiority. But this inflated ego is not a sign of strength. It is a facade built upon insecurity. Women who place their self-worth in how others see them are often left feeling empty, anxious, and disconnected from who they truly are. The more they chase the approval of others, the further they drift from authenticity. The inflated ego becomes a shield protecting them from vulnerability, yet it also keeps them trapped in a cycle of comparison and competition. They may appear confident, but underneath the surface they are struggling with feelings of unworthiness. This false self-image leads them to overcompensate, trying to prove themselves worthy, even when deep down they know that something is missing. This pursuit of validation doesn't just affect the individual, it has a ripple effect on relationships and society as a whole. A woman who builds her identity on an inflated ego often finds herself in a position where she feels disconnected from others. She may struggle to form genuine connections because she is too concerned with how others perceive her. The true, intimate connections that we all long for require vulnerability, humility, and the ability to be open, but an inflated ego prevents that. It keeps women locked in a constant struggle to maintain their image, pushing away those who could offer true companionship and support. Furthermore, an inflated ego can lead to feelings of resentment, arrogance, and entitlement. When a woman believes that she is superior to others, she may begin to look down on those who are perceived as less than or weaker. This creates divisions, both in relationships and in communities. It breeds an environment where true humility is dismissed and pride becomes the guiding force. The ego-driven woman, instead of celebrating the success of others or offering encouragement, often becomes focused on her own achievements, feeling threatened by anyone who might challenge her position or shine a light on her own insecurities. This world, it's easy to get caught up in the chase for recognition, accolades, and admiration. But the danger lies in believing that these things are what truly define a person. A woman who is trapped in the pursuit of an inflated ego may find that when she achieves her goals, the victory is hollow. The recognition she sought may fade, and she is left wondering why she still feels unfulfilled. The truth is, the more she elevates herself, the further she distances herself from the things that bring real peace, authentic self-acceptance, humility, and a life lived in service to others. An inflated ego doesn't just affect one's personal sense of self. It impacts every relationship, every interaction, and the way an individual navigates through life. This type of ego, built upon fragile perceptions and societal standards, slowly erodes the ability to connect with others on a meaningful level. Women, often conditioned by media and culture to strive for perfection, fall into the trap of comparing themselves to others, believing they must always be the best, the most admired, or the most accomplished. When women are taught to measure their worth by such external standards, it leads them to view themselves as superior or separate from the rest, a mindset that fosters division rather than unity. They come to believe that in order to succeed, they must rise above others, leaving behind a trail of fractured relationships and missed opportunities for genuine human connection. The inflated ego thrives on comparison. In a world where social media feeds are filled with curated perfection, women often feel the pressure to meet unattainable standards. They watch others attain what they believe is success, only to find themselves feeling inadequate, as though they don't measure up. This sense of inferiority leads them to inflate their own ego, to put on a front that says, "I'm fine," when deep down, they may be struggling with the same feelings of self-doubt and insecurity. The constant need to maintain this facade becomes exhausting. Every action, every word, every glance is filtered through the lens of how they will be perceived. The ego demands constant feeding, constant validation, and constant attention, leaving little room for the authentic, unguarded expressions of true self. At the core of an inflated ego is the belief that one must always be in control, that they must never appear vulnerable. Vulnerability is seen as weakness in a world that praises strength, independence, and self-reliance. But what an inflated ego fails to recognize is that true strength is found not in control, but in surrender. Surrender to one's true self, to one's purpose, and to the deeper truths that guide life. A woman trapped by her ego will often resist the urge to admit when she is wrong, to ask for help, or to allow herself to be guided. This resistance keeps her stuck in a cycle of self-sufficiency that ultimately leads to isolation. The more she clings to this idea of being above others, the less capable she becomes of truly connecting with people in an honest, supportive way. The danger of the inflated ego extends beyond personal relationships. It impacts communities, workplaces, and social structures in profound ways. Women who are driven by ego may struggle to collaborate or empathize with others, as they are focused more on competing and asserting dominance than on lifting others up. When ego takes the lead, compassion and understanding take a back seat. It creates a dynamic where everyone is out for themselves, where success is seen as a zero-sum game rather than a collective journey. Women who are caught in this cycle may even begin to sabotage others in their pursuit of personal gain, unaware that by doing so, they are contributing to a culture of division and disconnection. This is not to say that confidence and self-respect are inherently bad. On the contrary, confidence is important, but it must be rooted in self-awareness and humility, not in arrogance or superiority. When women elevate themselves above others, they fall prey to the illusion of invincibility. The more they cling to this inflated ego, the more they blind themselves to their own flaws and weaknesses, preventing personal growth. The refusal to confront one's own limitations leads to stagnation and ultimately prevents the possibility of true inner peace. In the end, an inflated ego is not a source of strength. It is a prison that locks women into a false narrative of who they are and what they must become. It keeps them from embracing their true potential, from experiencing the joy of authentic connection, and from living in alignment with their deeper values. The journey towards liberation involves letting go of the inflated ego, embracing humility, and allowing oneself to be guided by love, compassion, and the desire to serve others rather than to dominate. It is through this humility that true strength is found. The dangers of pride and self-exaltation are numerous, and they affect not just the individual who is consumed by ego, but also those around them. When pride takes root, it distorts one's understanding of the world, others, and even oneself. The individual who is driven by an inflated ego lives in a constant state of imbalance, constantly elevating their own importance and diminishing the worth of others. This self-exaltation may appear as confidence or strength, but in reality, it is a mask for insecurity and fear. It is important to understand that the dangers of pride extend far beyond the personal realm. They affect the way one engages with others, the way one interacts with their community, and ultimately the way one engages with life itself. First and foremost, pride causes individuals to distance themselves from others. A person who is consumed with self-exaltation cannot form deep, genuine relationships because their focus is always on themselves. They are more concerned with maintaining an image of superiority than truly connecting with others. The inflated ego demands attention, validation, and admiration, making it impossible for the individual to be truly present in the lives of those around them. Rather than embracing the shared humanity that unites us, they build walls between themselves and others, reinforcing their belief that they are above everyone else. This kind of emotional isolation is one of the most dangerous consequences of an inflated ego. It not only causes harm to the individual's emotional well-being, but also disrupts the harmony and support that should exist in relationships and communities. In addition to isolation, pride also leads to a lack of empathy. When one is focused solely on themselves, they are less able to understand and share the feelings of others. An inflated ego leads to a mindset that others are inferior, unworthy of the same level of respect or attention. In relationships, this can manifest as condescension, judgment, or even cruelty. A person with an inflated ego may belittle others to maintain their own sense of superiority. This behavior alienates people and undermines the very foundations of healthy relationships, which are built on mutual respect, understanding, and compassion. The dangers of pride also extend to personal growth. Pride blinds individuals to their own flaws and weaknesses, making it difficult for them to learn from their mistakes or grow in a meaningful way. When a person is consumed by self-exaltation, they are unwilling to accept criticism or feedback. They view themselves as perfect, incapable of error, and thus refuse to confront their own shortcomings. This inability to self-reflect leads to stagnation. Without the willingness to acknowledge one's imperfections, there is no opportunity for improvement or growth. Personal growth requires humility, the ability to learn from both successes and failures. An inflated ego, however, shuts down this process and keeps individuals trapped in their own limited perspective. The damage pride does is not confined to one's personal life. It also impacts the wider community. In the workplace, for example, pride can hinder collaboration and teamwork. A person driven by ego may resist sharing credit for a job well done, or they may become more concerned with their own advancement than with the success of the team as a whole. This attitude can create a toxic work environment where people feel undervalued and discouraged. In communities, pride can lead to division and competition rather than unity and cooperation. When individuals are more focused on elevating themselves than on working together toward a common goal, the entire community suffers. Pride also breeds entitlement. A person with an inflated ego begins to believe that the world owes them something, that they deserve special treatment, recognition, and rewards. This sense of entitlement can manifest in many forms, from expecting others to cater to their needs to feeling superior to those who they deem less than. Such an attitude can lead to frustration, disappointment, and bitterness when the world does not meet their inflated expectations. This constant yearning for validation and recognition only fuels the ego further, trapping the individual in a never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction and unfulfilled desires. One of the most significant dangers of pride, however, is its ability to lead one away from spiritual growth and true purpose. When a person is consumed with pride, they become disconnected from the higher calling of humility, service, and love. Pride fosters a sense of separation from others and from the divine purpose of life. Instead of living in harmony with others, the proud individual is caught in a relentless pursuit of personal glory. In this state, spiritual growth stagnates as the person fails to recognize the importance of humility and the need for spiritual nourishment. Pride pushes the individual to focus on themselves and their own desires, leaving little room for the selflessness and service that are at the heart of spiritual fulfillment. The dangers of pride and self-exaltation are clear. They breed isolation, prevent personal growth, damage relationships, and create division within communities. The individual who is driven by ego may experience temporary success or recognition, but these are fleeting and ultimately hollow. True fulfillment comes not from elevating oneself above others, but from recognizing the inherent value of humility, compassion, and service. The journey toward overcoming pride requires self-awareness, vulnerability, and the courage to confront one's flaws. Only through humility can a person truly experience the freedom and peace that come from embracing their authentic self and living in alignment with their deeper purpose. An inflated ego is not just a psychological issue. It is a spiritual sickness that has far-reaching consequences. It is a condition that separates a person from their true purpose in life, distorting their sense of self-worth and relationship with others. When pride takes root, it leads one to believe they are self-sufficient, that they are masters of their own destiny, and that they have no need for guidance from a higher power. This mindset not only distorts their view of themselves, but also their view of the world and the divine. An ego-driven individual is trapped in a cycle of self-worship, relying on their own understanding and abilities instead of seeking the wisdom and strength that comes from a humble, open heart. At its core, the inflated ego is a form of rebellion against the truth of who we are and who we are meant to be. It is a denial of the very essence of our humanity, which is to be humble, teachable, and reliant on the grace and guidance of a higher power. In many religious traditions, pride is considered one of the most destructive forces a person can embrace. It prevents spiritual growth by erecting a barrier between the individual and their spiritual source. When one is consumed with ego, they are not open to the divine. They become self-absorbed, turning inward and focusing solely on their own desires and needs rather than seeking a higher purpose or understanding. In doing so, they cut themselves off from the deeper truth that life is not about self-promotion, but about service, love, and connection to something greater than oneself. The Bible warns us against the dangers of pride, reminding us that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. This is not just a moral lesson, it is a reflection of a deeper spiritual truth. When we elevate ourselves above others and above God, we invite destruction into our lives. We become blind to our own weaknesses, fail to acknowledge our dependence on the divine, and set ourselves up for failure. The more we cling to our own inflated sense of self-importance, the more we distance ourselves from the wisdom and grace that could guide us toward a life of peace, fulfillment, and purpose. This spiritual sickness of pride also affects the way we interact with others. When we are driven by an inflated ego, we see others as lesser, as tools to be used for our own gain. We lose the capacity for empathy, compassion, and understanding. Instead of seeing the divine spark in every person, we become blinded by our own need to dominate, control, and maintain our sense of superiority. This leads to a breakdown in relationships and community. When pride reigns, love cannot flourish. Instead of lifting others up, we push them down in an effort to elevate ourselves. But the good news is that spiritual healing from the sickness of pride is possible. The first step in overcoming this ego-driven mindset is to recognize the truth of our own limitations and our need for grace. We must acknowledge that we are not in control, that we are not the masters of our own destiny, and that we are dependent on a higher power for guidance, strength, and purpose. This recognition is not a sign of weakness, but of true strength, the strength to admit that we cannot do it all on our own, and that we were never meant to. Humility is the antidote to the inflated ego. Humility opens the door to spiritual growth, allowing us to be teachable and receptive to the divine wisdom that is always available to us. True spiritual growth begins when we let go of the need to be in control and surrender to the guidance of the divine. This surrender is not about weakness, but about trust, trusting that there is a greater purpose at work in our lives, one that is far beyond our understanding. When we humble ourselves, we open ourselves to the flow of divine love and grace which transforms us from the inside out. Instead of being driven by the need for validation and external recognition, we are empowered by the quiet strength of knowing that we are part of a greater whole, a greater plan, and that our worth is not determined by what we achieve but by who we are in the eyes of the divine. As we let go of our inflated egos and embrace humility, we find that we are not diminished but strengthened. True strength lies in service to others, in putting aside our own desires and working for the good of all. Humility brings us into alignment with our higher purpose, allowing us to live a life of meaning, peace, and fulfillment. When we overcome the sickness of pride, we are healed, not just spiritually but emotionally and relationally as well. We no longer need to build walls around ourselves to protect our fragile ego. Instead, we are free to love and be loved, to give and receive, to live in harmony with the divine and with each other. The spiritual consequences of an inflated ego are profound, but they are not permanent. Through humility, surrender, and the recognition of our dependence on the divine, we can overcome the sickness of pride and open the door to a deeper, more fulfilling spiritual life. It is a journey that requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to embrace the truth of who we are. Not as self-made individuals, but as creations of a higher power, destined to live in service, love, and humility. An inflated ego not only disrupts a person's internal peace, but also creates chaos in their external world, especially in their relationships. When a woman's sense of self-worth is tied to an inflated ego, she becomes locked in a cycle of competition, comparison, and defensiveness, which ultimately damages the very relationships that should provide her with love, support, and connection. Relationships thrive on mutual respect, understanding, and empathy, but when the ego takes precedence, it becomes increasingly difficult to relate to others in a genuine, meaningful way. This disconnect begins with the way the ego manifests itself in interactions and continues to influence the dynamics of friendships, family bonds, and romantic partnerships. One of the key ways an inflated ego manifests in relationships is through the need for constant validation. A person who believes their worth is tied to external recognition often demands excessive praise and affirmation from others. This constant need for reassurance creates a one-sided dynamic, where the focus of the relationship shifts from mutual care and respect to the constant act of feeding the ego. In friendships, for example, this need for validation can become exhausting, as the ego-driven individual places an immense burden on others to affirm their value constantly. This can lead to frustration and even resentment from those around them, who may feel that their needs are being overlooked, or that their feelings are not being acknowledged. In romantic relationships, the impact of an inflated ego can be even more profound. When one partner is consumed with self-promotion and self-interest, it becomes nearly impossible for the relationship to function in a healthy, balanced way. A woman with an inflated ego may prioritize her own desires and aspirations, leaving little room for her partner's needs, dreams, or feelings. She may also struggle to accept vulnerability or to admit her mistakes, seeing these as threats to her sense of superiority. As a result, communication becomes stilted, honesty is stifled, and the relationship begins to crumble under the weight of pride and self-absorption. Instead of growing together as a couple, the two individuals become further apart, caught in a dynamic where one or both partners are constantly trying to outshine each other rather than work toward a common goal. The inflated ego also creates a sense of competition in relationships. Rather than fostering collaboration and support, the person driven by ego is constantly measuring themselves against others. This can lead to feelings of insecurity, jealousy, and bitterness, as they view anyone who succeeds or gains attention as a threat to their own status. In friendships, this creates tension and rivalry, as the ego-driven person cannot celebrate the success of others without feeling diminished. In romantic relationships, this competition can create an unhealthy power struggle, where each person is focused on asserting their dominance rather than nurturing mutual love and respect. This constant comparison undermines trust and fosters an environment where love is replaced by competition and connection is replaced by distance. Furthermore, the inflated ego can make it incredibly difficult to maintain humility and admit when one is wrong. Pride often prevents individuals from taking responsibility for their actions or acknowledging their mistakes, as doing so would threaten their carefully constructed image of superiority. This refusal to accept fault or seek forgiveness creates a rift in relationships, as it leaves the other person feeling unheard and unappreciated. In any healthy relationship, being able to own one's mistakes and apologize when necessary is essential for growth and understanding. But the ego prevents this by keeping individuals locked in a state of defensiveness, unable to be vulnerable enough to admit fault or to heal the wounds they have caused. The inability to accept criticism or feedback is another damaging aspect of an inflated ego in relationships. When a woman believes her worth is based on her external achievements and image, any form of criticism feels like a direct attack on her sense of self. Instead of listening to others with an open heart and mind, she becomes defensive, shutting down opportunities for growth and self-improvement. This defensiveness erodes trust and communication, which are the cornerstones of any strong relationship. Without the willingness to be open to feedback, relationships stagnate, and the ego-driven individual remains stuck in a cycle of self-deception, unable to evolve into a more balanced, understanding, and compassionate version of themselves. Another key aspect of how the inflated ego impacts relationships is the inability to truly empathize with others. When a person's ego is in control, they are so focused on their own needs, desires, and perceptions that they fail to see the world through anyone else's eyes. This lack of empathy makes it difficult to connect with others on a deeper level, as the ego-driven individual cannot fully appreciate the emotions, struggles, or experiences of those around them. This absence of empathy fosters a sense of emotional distance, as the other person feels unheard and unimportant. In both friendships and romantic relationships, Empathy is the glue that binds people together, allowing them to share in each other's joys and sorrows and to offer support during difficult times. Without it, relationships become shallow and one-dimensional, leaving both parties feeling unfulfilled and disconnected. The impact of an inflated ego on relationships extends beyond individual connections to the broader community. A woman who is consumed by her own image and status may inadvertently contribute to a culture of division, competition, and comparison. Instead of supporting others and fostering a sense of unity, she may create an environment where people feel the need to compete for attention, approval, and recognition. This creates a toxic dynamic in communities where people become isolated and mistrustful of one another. The ego-driven individual may fail to see how their actions ripple outward, affecting not just their own relationships but the broader fabric of their social environment. Ultimately, the inflated ego is a barrier to authentic connection. It isolates individuals from those who could offer them love, support, and understanding, and it prevents them from experiencing the richness of genuine relationships. True intimacy and connection are built on mutual respect, vulnerability, and empathy, all of which are undermined by the presence of an inflated ego. The first step toward healing these fractured relationships is recognizing the damage caused by pride and choosing to embrace humility, vulnerability, and a willingness to put others' needs before one's own. Only then can true, meaningful relationships begin to flourish, creating a foundation of trust, love, and understanding. The consequences of an inflated ego in a woman's life extend beyond her personal and relational dynamics, ultimately influencing her professional world and how she navigates the challenges and opportunities presented there. The ego-driven woman may appear confident and assertive on the surface, but beneath that exterior lies a deep-seated insecurity that makes it difficult for her to thrive in environments that require cooperation, adaptability, and self-awareness. Whether in the workplace, in business, or in community leadership roles, an inflated ego can be a significant barrier to success, as it distorts judgment, undermines effective collaboration, and prevents growth. One of the most noticeable impacts of an inflated ego in a professional setting is the inability to accept constructive criticism or feedback. When a woman's sense of worth is tied to her external accomplishments and recognition, any form of feedback, especially if it's perceived as negative, is taken as an attack on her character or ability. The ego-driven woman often responds defensively, dismissing or rejecting feedback rather than using it as a tool for growth. In a workplace, this creates a toxic atmosphere where learning and improvement are stifled. Constructive criticism is one of the primary means by which professionals grow and develop. If a woman is unable or unwilling to listen to feedback, she risks remaining stagnant in her skills and knowledge, which can hinder career advancement and prevent her from fulfilling her potential. The inflated ego also has a tendency to foster an environment of competition rather than collaboration. In many professional settings, teamwork is essential for achieving goals and completing projects efficiently. However, when one individual is driven by an inflated sense of self-importance, collaboration becomes challenging. The ego-driven woman may prioritize her own success and recognition over the collective success of the team. This mindset leads to a lack of cooperation, as she may view colleagues not as partners, but as rivals to be outdone or overshadowed. She may withhold information, take credit for others' work, or even sabotage the efforts of her peers to ensure that she remains the center of attention. This type of behavior creates a toxic work environment where trust and mutual respect are eroded, and the team's collective potential is undermined. Another damaging effect of an inflated ego in the workplace is the tendency to overestimate one's abilities or judgment. A woman with an inflated ego may believe that she has all the answers and that her way of doing things is the only right way. This overconfidence can lead to poor decision-making, as she may ignore the input of others or fail to acknowledge potential weaknesses in her plans. In a fast-paced, constantly evolving professional world, adaptability and the willingness to recognize one's limitations are critical. The inflated ego prevents this type of self-awareness, making it difficult for the individual to adjust to new information or changing circumstances. As a result, she may miss out on important opportunities for growth, both personally and professionally, because she is too focused on preserving her own image and authority. In addition to decision-making and collaboration, leadership itself can be profoundly affected by an inflated ego. Leaders with inflated egos may struggle to inspire and motivate their teams because their primary focus is on their own advancement and recognition rather than the well-being and growth of others. Effective leadership requires a deep understanding of the needs and potential of those being led. It requires humility, empathy, and a willingness to empower others to succeed. However, when a leader is driven by ego, they tend to prioritize their own status and success over the success of their team. This type of leadership breeds resentment and disengagement among team members, as they may feel unappreciated, undervalued, or disregarded. Instead of creating an environment of collaboration, mutual respect, and growth, an ego-driven leader creates a culture of competition, mistrust, and stagnation. Moreover, an inflated ego can also manifest in a resistance to learning. In many fields, continuous education and self-improvement are vital to staying relevant and competitive. However, the ego-driven individual may resist opportunities for learning or growth, believing that they already know everything they need to know. This attitude leads to stagnation and prevents professional development. It also limits the ability to innovate and adapt to new trends, technologies, and methodologies that could enhance one's effectiveness and success. In the long run, this refusal to learn and grow will result in missed opportunities and career setbacks, as others who are open to new ideas and constructive criticism move ahead. On a broader scale, the inflated ego also affects the way a woman handles success and failure in her career. When a woman is driven by ego, success is seen as a reflection of her superiority, and failure is a direct threat to her self-image. This mindset makes it difficult for her to handle setbacks with grace or learn from her mistakes. Instead of seeing failure as an opportunity for growth and improvement, the woman with an inflated ego may become discouraged or even bitter, blaming others for her misfortunes or refusing to take responsibility for her actions. This refusal to confront failure in a constructive way inhibits progress and diminishes her ability to bounce back from adversity. Furthermore, in the world of business, an inflated ego can lead to poor relationships with clients, customers, and colleagues. Success in business is not just about having the right product or service. It is also about building relationships based on trust, respect, and mutual benefit. A businesswoman with an inflated ego may overlook the importance of these relationships in favor of personal recognition or power. She may dismiss customer concerns, overpromise and underdeliver, or focus solely on her own interests rather than the long-term success of her clients or business partners. As a result, she may alienate key stakeholders and damage her reputation, which can ultimately hurt the business she is trying to grow. The truth is, in any professional setting, humility is just as important as competence. Women who allow their egos to take over their professional lives may experience short-term successes, but they will struggle to maintain long-term success and satisfaction. The key to a fulfilling and prosperous career lies not in self-promotion or the relentless pursuit of personal gain, but in the ability to collaborate, learn from others, and remain open to new opportunities for growth. Women who can manage their egos and remain humble in the face of success and failure are better equipped to navigate the challenges of their professional lives and achieve sustainable success. In the end, the inflated ego is a barrier to professional fulfillment. It isolates individuals, hinders collaboration, stifles personal growth, and prevents the development of meaningful relationships. Whether in business, leadership, or any other professional environment, the ability to set aside one's ego and embrace humility, self-awareness, and a willingness to learn is essential for true success. The journey toward professional greatness is not about asserting one's superiority, but about lifting others up, learning from mistakes, and remaining open to the possibility of growth and change. It is through this humility that women can achieve not only career success but personal fulfillment and meaningful impact in their communities and beyond. The journey to overcoming an inflated ego is one that requires introspection, humility, and a willingness to change. A woman consumed by an inflated ego may find herself trapped in a cycle of competition, isolation, and self-deception, distorting her sense of self-worth and damaging her relationships, both personal and professional. The ego prevents true connection, growth, and fulfillment, causing her to prioritize her own image and recognition over the love, collaboration, and empathy that lead to real success and happiness. To destroy an inflated ego is not to destroy a woman's confidence or strength, but to replace pride with humility, defensiveness with vulnerability, and isolation with genuine connection. It is to embrace the truth that true power lies not in self-exaltation, but in lifting others up, in recognizing that personal worth comes not from external validation, but from inner peace, compassion, and a heart attuned to the needs of others. As we strive for success in our personal lives, relationships, and careers, let us remember that the path to greatness is not paved with self-centeredness, but with service, not with pride, but with humility, not with isolation, but with connection. It is through humility that we find true strength, through vulnerability that we find true courage, and through love that we find true fulfillment. Let us all commit to recognizing the dangers of an inflated ego in our own lives and in the lives of those around us. May we choose to walk the path of humility, to engage in relationships that honor mutual respect and understanding, and to embrace the opportunity for growth and self-improvement that lies in acknowledging our imperfections. Only then can we truly become the best versions of ourselves, living a life full of meaning, connection, and peace. Thank you.